right. Beef prices are now at record highs, and if you have purchased beef at the grocery store lately, you have been ripped off. And the reason you're able to be ripped off is because there is no longer a competitive marketplace for beef in this country. The people buying the cattle and selling the beef are not competing with each other. They are simply controlling the amount of beef in the supply chain to increase their profit margins. The reason they're able to do that is because there is not enough of them. And they all know they've gotten to, there's only four. There's Tyson Foods, Cargill, JBS, and National, and they have all gotten so big that they know they're already breaking antitrust laws. They're breaking this Packers and Stockyards Act, and instead of competing for market share and trying to get bigger, they've decided they're just going to control the supply chain. And by controlling the supply, they control the demand, they control pricing, and they're now able to increase their profit margins to levels that nobody ever even would have imagined possible a year or two ago. And so how this works, and there's also, it's just like any other corrupt corporation, they're going to have people that carry their water for them and make excuses that they've bought and paid for. There's people in ag media and at these ag universities and different associations, lobbyist groups that are going to come out and say, well, the market's real complicated and there's all these different variables and don't even try to understand it, but everything's working fine. But it's not complicated and it's easy to understand. It's just the same as any other market out there. It's just supply and demand. And so how I like to explain it is, if you imagine yourself as a beef packer and you are butchering 2 head of cattle every day, and on those 2 head, you're making $200 per head. So you're making $400 a day and you're making a good living and a good profit. And all of a sudden something happens and now you're only able to butcher 1 head of cattle a day. And on that 1 head, because there's less supply of beef, you're able to increase your pricing, and all of a sudden you're making $1,000 a day. And so your income has jumped at 2 head, 400, 1 head, 1,000. And now you've got less payroll, less facilities needed, less logistical issues, just less everything, and you're making more money. Are you going to be in a hurry to go back and work harder for $400 a day, or are you going to want to sit on your $1,000 a day and just rake it in and just butcher that one? You're going to want to sit on $1,000 a day. But in a competitive marketplace, what you would have is somebody else would say they would want that market share, they would want that shelf space, and they would come in and they would butcher 2, 4, 6, 8, whatever it took, because you're in a competitive marketplace. But in this scenario, there's only 4 of you. There's you and 3 other beef packers, and you're just kind of looking at each other while you're making your $1,000 a day and thinking, why would we ever go back? Why would we ever increase production again when we can sit back and make more money than we ever dreamed of? And so that's where we're at. And what they're doing is illegal. And that's they always have to have an excuse. Right now, their excuse is a labor shortage. Last year, it was COVID, of course, and then the year before that, there was a little fire that broke out in one beef packing plant in Kansas, and it's just always another excuse. And every time, the profit margins just get more. They just stretch those profit margins out more and more. And so, how do you fix it? Well, what they're doing is illegal, so you need an investigation and charges filed. And so that's where we're at. Senator Mike Rounds out of South Dakota and a Senator Tina Smith is a Democrat out of Minnesota. So you have a Republican and Democrat drafted this letter and to the Attorney General asking for an investigation. And a number of other senators have signed on to it. My Senator Chuck Grassley is tweeting about asking for an investigation on Twitter the last couple days. USDA, he wants USDA and Department of Justice to investigate. And that's where we are. We're trying to get as many senators as possible signed on to this letter to demand an investigation into what's going on, because their constituents are getting ripped off. And this, I would think that all 50 states, all senators of all 50 states could sign on to this bill. This isn't a partisan issue. This isn't about ideology or party loyalty or any of that stuff. If I would think that if your constituents are going to the grocery store to buy food and getting ripped off, then you would have no problem signing on to this letter. And so what we really need is public awareness and to get the word out. And this has really become just a beef crisis, a crisis in the industry right now. And so there is really no reason, if we're trying to get this word out, this should be the cover story on every farm media publication. Farm Journal, Progressive Farmer, Drovers, Beef Today. If we're actually having if this crisis is going on, cattlemen are losing money, beef packers are making record margins. I mean, this should be really a mainstream media story. On CNBC, there's a commodities report every day. On Fox Business, there's a commodities report every day. But if our own ag media won't cover this and won't give this the urgency that it deserves, why would anybody else care? Why would the Attorney General care? And how would the public ever even know that it's happening? A lot of them, you just go to the store, you pay the prices, or if you look at your beef price and it's too high, then you go down and buy chicken or pork or something else. And so what we really need is public awareness right now, because if it doesn't get fixed, what's going to happen is a lot of good people are going to lose their jobs, lose their businesses, and really eventually will just lose a complete way of life. That's really important to the rural America. And on the other end of that, if it doesn't get fixed, and you want to go and you enjoy grilling steaks every once in a while, every time you fire that grill up, you'd better just be ready to pay $30 a pound for the steaks you're buying. JBS cyber attack last week, and I feel like everything that went on around that kind of gives a good window into how the cattle industry has gotten to where it is. And where it is, if you saw the last video, I explained how 4 major corporations control the entire beef industry and are able to work together to control the amount of supply of beef in the supply chain. And by doing that, they're able to increase their profit margins, increase retail prices, decrease cattle prices. And so when JBS gets attacked and gets shut down, it seemed like a lot of people were surprised to find out, especially in the media and just everyone, that one Brazilian-owned corporation controls 25% of all the meat produced in the U.S. And so the one thing that wasn't reported was that same corporation is controlled and ran by 2 people who've been convicted of and pled guilty to bribing politicians, bribing government officials, and bribing food safety inspectors in their country of Brazil. I believe they both went to prison for it. And when you're talking about a corporation that controls a major part of America's food security, I feel like that's a pretty relevant issue. And that just goes back to show how the cattle industry and how the beef industry is very easy to cover things up. And so when those 4 corporations work together to break antitrust laws and to ignore the Packers and Stockyards Act, it doesn't get reported on, and they don't get prosecuted because the organizations in charge of enforcing those laws are based out of Washington, D.C., Department of Justice and USDA. And like everything else in Washington, D.C., they're heavily influenced by lobbyists that are controlled by major corporations. And so in my last video, I talked about a letter. Mike Rounds, a Republican out of South Dakota, Tina Smith, a Democrat out of Minnesota, put together this letter asking the Attorney General to investigate market manipulation in the cattle industry. And they wanted other senators to sign on to it. And I said there was no reason why every single senator wouldn't want to sign on to this. I mean, it's not a conviction. It's just saying that they want this thing looked into. That, like, America's food security is important enough to have this thing investigated. And they only got 28. They got 28 total signatures. I feel like that was pretty good, but there was no reason why wouldn't anybody else, why wouldn't every senator sign on to that? And the reason is because at the same time he was putting this letter out and trying to get signatures, the North American Meat Institute which is a lobbyist organization based out of Washington, D.C., who on their board of directors has JBS, Cargill, Tyson Foods, and National, and they control this lobbyist organization, and they put out this press release saying that this market manipulation was all just a myth, and it was all just this big coincidence that, you know, it just so happens that cattle producers are growing broke while beef packers are now making record profits. And everything that's happened in the past few years is just how the market works. And so, and I'm sure that same organization was also, they're based in DC. I'm sure they were knocking on doors and talking about campaign contributions to people. You know, Nebraska didn't have a single senator sign onto that bill. Senator Fisher, Senator Sass, I know we're getting lots of phone calls on the same day that JBS gets shut down and it gets revealed that a major corporation can be shut down at a flick of a switch. And they control a massive amount of the U.S. food security. Those people refuse to sign on to this bill. Oklahoma didn't have a single senator sign on to it. And a number of large beef producing states had names missing. And it has to be because they get pressure from these lobbyists and campaign contributions from major corporations, and they don't want to ruffle those feathers. And so, another problem, I also said in the last video that this was a major issue, that every ag publication, this should be the top story, that this market's being manipulated. Well, it wasn't the top story, but what was the top story for Beef Magazine was the North American Meat Institute's press release. They put it on their website, just like one of their writers wrote it. And they put the headline, North American Meat Institute Bucks Beef Market Miss. And they printed it word for word. And Beef Magazine is a cattle producer magazine aimed at cattle producers. And so they're pushing this stuff out to say that all this market stuff going on is just one big myth. And then at the very bottom, and if you didn't read it all the way to the bottom and you didn't read in the little, you know, italicized quotes at the bottom that says, we are not responsible for any of this content, you would have thought that Beef Magazine people wrote it. And how a magazine publication can put something on their website, word for word, written by a lobbyist, and then at the bottom say, we're not responsible for this information. You are responsible for every piece of information that's published on your website, especially when you're campaigning against the people you're sending the magazine to. It is so ridiculous that this keeps happening. Drover's Magazine does nothing but make excuses for the beef packers. Just every ag organization out there just lets this stuff go and doesn't want to bring it up because they don't want to ruffle feathers. They know where the big money's at. And that's the reason why now you're watching someone sitting in their horn shop, because the people in ag media won't come out and really tell the truth on what's going on. So like Steve Stratford sits in his sale barn, tells the truth of what's going on, gets hundreds of thousands of views. And so that brings us to the next issue with North American Meat Institute, which is the biggest issue of all. The beef checkoff. And the beef checkoff, if you're not familiar, takes $1 out of every sale. Every time an animal sells, they take $1 out of that check for that animal. And the North American Meat Institute got $994,068 from the beef checkoff, which means cattle producers are financing a lobbyist organization that is campaigning pretty much to put them out of business and to not have this investigation go through. And that, to me, is mind-blowing. And right now, there's another campaign. There's a petition out to look at this beef checkoff and hopefully make some changes. And there's a lot of questions about the petition, and hopefully going forward, my plan is to try to get some videos out that will answer all these questions, because there's also a lot of lies being told about the petition. But if you could imagine being a beef producer and working your ass off and seeing that money come out of your check every time you sell cattle, and then you open up Beef Magazine and you see this entire press release published by this magazine that's supposed to be supporting you, and you know that your dollars, $994,068, are going towards this campaign that is pretty much trying to put you out of business while you're losing hundreds of dollars on every animal you sell and every animal you feed, I cannot imagine how you can't sign on to this petition to get this beef checkoff updated and get that money out of those people's pockets.
Good evening, folks. Steve Stratford here tonight. Pratt Kettle Chat between the CME futures today and the box beef prices with the checkoff referendum we're all talking about here. I guess they've put a lot of quarters in me today, so I'm on here to do a little cattle feeding lesson or comparison, or bring some things to light to some people that may not be in the position to know or understand. So as of the close today, after they beat up the fat cattle board, you have an August fat cattle futures at 117. So let's do some backwards math. You got a 1,450 pound steer fat in August at 117. That's $1,696.50. Put 500 pounds on him with today's corn cost to the feed yard at $1.30 cost to gain all in, which I don't know that you can do that, but that's what we're going to figure on a big fleshy 950 weight. That's $650 in feed cost. That leaves you $1,046.50 to buy that 950 pound steer. He has to be bought at 110 delivered to the yard. Most sale barns, it's between commission and of the order buyer and freight to the yard, it's going to be $2. So you're, for a feed yard today in the sale barn to buy a steer that will break even, not lock in a profit, not make money, break even, he needs to buy that steer at 108. 30 days ago, that steer was bringing 130 to 140 when the futures market was $7-8 higher. In that time frame that your 9-weight steers devalued $20-30 a hundred, boxed beef prices have went up $30 a hundred. The opposite direction. Your 9-weight steer that you've raised, put out on wheat, you've owned for a year, has devalued $30 a hundred, and the product he turns into has went up $30 a hundred. So next time you're talking to your state NCBA affiliates, here it'd be KLA or NCBA, ask them if that's in the trigger concept, if that's set any trigger that they're going to call them to any action. If that doesn't work, I wonder if they set up a trigger that if June live hogs were higher than June live cattle, which that happened today. June live hogs closed at 113.55, June live cattle at 113.02. First time I've seen it in my life. So I guess that's what's telling you. You need to go out and buy all the $4.99 pork chops you possibly can, because in June they're going to cost $19.99 at the grocery store, if it's a true comparison. So you've got box beef at record levels, the fat board declining, the feeders declining, and the packers making gross margin today with $301.22 choice boxes, $283.91 select boxes, a pen that grades 75% choice, $2.97 box beef price. Steer yield 64%. That fat's worth $1.90 this week with the June futures. The way things are, let's pretend we trade at 115. That's a $75 a hundred margin for the Packers. $75 a hundred on a 1,450 pound steer is $1,087 gross margin. They kill 580,000 to 600,000 of them a week. That's not including kill cows. So the packing sector is getting along pretty good, it looks to me like. That's a gross margin of $600 million this week. $1.2 billion in 2 weeks. Just think across the country, out of all these real economies, what that's sucking out of there, that the 4 major corporations that are over 50% foreign owned are sucking out of the rural real economies. I think that what does that to the fall calf prices, when these feed yards that have come and given big prices and good prices to the producers for what they produce are closing out losers, and you know, how they're going to adjust their prices on what they buy next time. And that's what we need to keep in mind. I mean, these feed yards and these sale barns, a lot of producers leave, and I hear them, you know, well, they robbed them, or well, we give them away, or, you know, they bought them cheap, so on and so forth. Folks, there ain't been a cheap calf or a cheap feeder sell the day he sold for 5 years. I mean, these feed yards and sale barns and order buyers are your friends. I mean, they're the ones in there with the competitive market bidding against each other every time, week in, week out, giving more for these cattle than they're worth on the futures board to lay them off. You know, betting on the come, and that's going to end. I mean, if we have no correlation between our product and the price of our fat cattle, then, you know, eventually that's going to get adjusted, or the guys in there competing aren't going to be in business, and you're going to have less competition, and then you're going to see what stealing them means. So I guess with all those comparisons, I'd like to add one more, and this is on the note of the checkoff reform. Since 1984, when the checkoff went in, beef consumptions went from 80 pounds per capita to 60 pounds per capita. We lost 20 pounds. Now do a graph on packer margins since 1984. See what that's done. See what cow-calf profitability in this country's done, other than the short little spell during the drought that got the numbers in our favor. And the packers' margins were still the same. They were long the board, and they might have been printing that they were killing in red ink, but you know, they jumped on board with the funds and got long the board. The funds are long the grains. The funds are long oil, everything else. All commodities are going up. The cattle are so manipulated, I don't even think that the funds want to mess with them. Hence why June live hogs are higher than June live cattle today. But I implore you to bring this to notice to any state and federal official that you can, whether that's letters, emails, phone calls. I beg you to find a way to get on www.checkoffvote.com and sign the electric petition, or message any one of the people that are working so hard at it to get you a paper copy to signature, and get everybody that you know to be aware and get out there and be proactive in some way. You know, this has got to change. You know, these levels are not sustainable at today's fixed input costs. You know, $70,000 pickups and $400 a ton cake, and repair bills that are crazy, and, you know, $3 gas, and these beef producers can't do this. And it's not a lack of value of the product. It's not a lack of value in the chain. It's a lack of any ability to catch the margin that belongs to the people that do all the work. So, like I say, the quarters were put in me today. I hope this helps some people understand the dynamics here. If anything I can do to help, give me a call, 620-546-1789. And, you know, remember the checkoff reform, 5014, you know, neither of those are the golden key to fix it, folks. But both of those show some kind of backbone, some kind of spine, and both will help a little. And if we'll start doing that and start garnering some attention, we might be able to rewrite this ship. But sitting here doing absolutely nothing, saying you should sign the petition, or boy, you would, and not doing it, doesn't do a damn thing. I mean, we have got to be active here. We've got to get something done. We've got to show we make a stand. For God's sakes, we're cowboys, folks. Let's grab a spine, grab your balls, let's get something done. Thank you.